right, well, this morning, it is Mother's Day, but instead of really a Mother's Day message, we're finishing the series on foundation. And so 2 weeks ago, you heard about faith and trusting in God, and last week, you heard about building on the foundation of the Word and how important it is to know the Word and build your life on that. And this is the last week of foundation. Before I get into what the topic is, I'm going to share a quick story with you guys. If you're a parent, you can probably relate to this, but we have 3 girls. Right now, they all had their birthdays, so they fall exactly at they're 11, 9, and 7 years old. So they're all 2 years apart right now until the next birthday. But we had, our older 2 were just really thoughtful and compliant, sensitive, and there were some challenges in their being sensitive. If you have had a sensitive child, you know that sometimes it can be exhausting because they have a lot of emotions, but they're very thoughtful, real prone to care about other people. And so those are my oldest 2. And, being a parent is hard, and I remember looking back, I can see so many challenges and so many moments where I thought, I don't really know if I know what I'm doing. Am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? But after a few years, it started to kind of feel like, okay, I'm getting this, right? I think I kind of am starting to feel like I know a little bit what I'm doing, right? And then along comes our 3rd child, who makes me realize I have no idea what I'm doing all over again. If you have children, you probably can relate that they're obviously not the same, but some children are a little bit more like, whoa, what do we do here? So when our oldest 2 were little, one of the things that if you are around young kids, one of their biggest issues is sharing, right? 1 and 2-year-olds, everything is mine. I want this. But our older 2 were so sensitive that the way that we kind of handled that was we could just say, well, how would you feel if she wouldn't share that with you? And it would be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll give it to you in a minute. And so that connected really well with them. And then my 3rd child comes along and, is hoarding everything. And I say, well, how do you think that makes them feel? And she's like, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I want this, it doesn't sway her opinion at all to know that someone's feelings are impacted by this. And she has some beautiful, wonderful traits. But in that moment, it was like, oh my gosh, my go-to is not working. What do I do here? And so it was a funny moment where I was like, I've learned so much, and yet I have so much more that I don't know. And so if you're a parent, you can probably relate to that. But I think, honestly, we can relate to that in our walk with the Lord, too. It seems like just when we feel like we're learning something, I have a moment where I'm like, oh, I really don't think I know anything about this now. And so there's always so much more. There's always so much more that he has to show us. There's always new things that he's revealing about himself. And that's the beautiful part about walking with him. And so this week's topic is prayer. I want to really dive into what does it look like to build a secret place with the Lord? What does it look like to build a prayer life? There's different things that we could think of when we say the word prayer. One thing might be interceding, hey, I put this person before the Lord and I speak the word over them and I contend for their destiny. And probably most of us in this room have someone that did that for us, that basically prayed us into the kingdom, right? And so intercession is prayer. We know that prayer can also be, like Jesus shared in the Lord's Prayer, just worshiping God and telling him how good he is. That's part of prayer, right? Prayer is also bringing our own requests before the Lord. It's also sharing the things that are in our heart with the Lord, and it's also listening, right? And so back when I used to work with the youth, the middle school students, which is an amazing age, and if you don't know where to get involved, middle school is great. Check in with Seth. I'm sure he can use more people in middle school. It's always a blast working with them. But I remember talking about prayer, they would always be like, but what is prayer? Can you just tell me in a sentence, what is it? You've mentioned all these things like I just talked about. And we would break it down really simply by just saying prayer is conversation with God. It's conversation because if I want to get to know someone, say if I want to get to know Anna, and I sit down with her and I just say, here's all the things I need and all the things that are going wrong, and here's how I feel about this, and here's another thing I need, and I just tell her all the stuff that's going on with me, and then I get up and I leave. Do I know her anymore at all? Absolutely not, right? I've just shared and done all the talking. And it's easy in prayer to know those pieces that are us talking, but there's a piece in that building that secret place where we flip over to hearing and listening and connecting with him. And so this morning I want to share with you guys that I walked with the Lord. I've walked with him basically my whole life since I can remember. He's been there and he's been faithful. I chose to serve him and give my life to him when I was 4, and I can remember that moment, though I had no idea probably the fullness of what it meant, right? But I remember just knowing that he loved me and that I didn't want to live without him. And so I gave my life to him from a young age, and I walked with him. But there was a moment in my life where even though I had built a secret place, even though I prayed every day, even though I spent time with him, all of a sudden I hit this moment where I realized there was so much that I didn't know still. And it changed everything for me. And this happened about 12 years ago in the year 2009. And I'm going to share this testimony, the story from my life that Holy Spirit asked me to share. And I went back and forth with him a little bit, to be honest, because it's a little bit vulnerable, but he asked me to share it, and so I'm going to be obedient and do that. And so this happened, like I said, in 2009. My husband and I had been married for 2 years, and one thing that we both always knew is that we really wanted to have children, that we wanted a family. And so I was super excited in 2009 when I found out that I was expecting our first baby. It was an exciting moment. It was a nervous moment, like we're stepping into this new season. And I remember I did 2 things right away. Before I even told him, I did 2 things. Number 1 was I made a doctor's appointment right away because I had this funny concern, like what if the test was positive and I'm really not pregnant, and then we tell everyone, and I'm like, oops, I was wrong. So I went in right away and had them do a blood draw to measure that. And I also had started diving into the Word, because like we talked about last week, the Word is the foundation, right, that we can build on. And so right away I'm diving into the Word and finding every verse that I can on what it is to be healthy, to have a healthy baby, all God's promises for our children and how they're going to be whole and complete and perfect. And I had verses about, bones being whole and eyes being whole, and everywhere in the Bible that it mentioned our body, I knew every verse, and I put it on a piece of paper, and I was speaking that every day over our baby. And meanwhile, the doctor's office had called, and I had a couple different blood tests. And basically at the end of that, in their very medical way, they let me know in no uncertain terms that this was not a viable pregnancy, that she just predicted, you're going to miscarry, just so you know, this baby's not going to live. And so I hung up the phone with her. And growing up in a faith community, we learn things and we internalize them a certain way. And so the way that I had taken in what I learned and the way that I interpreted it for myself, this is not what anyone said, but I interpreted that what you do when you get a diagnosis or something was I should just pretend it's not there and ignore it. And so there's power in believing in the Word, but what I did was I just pretended like what was actually being spoken was not true, and so I kind of just shut it aside. I didn't really want to tell anyone about it, and I just kept reading those verses every day. Meanwhile, not really understanding that even though I was pretending that diagnosis wasn't there, it was impacting me because I was afraid. If I had been really honest, I was afraid because this felt real. I knew the Word was real, and I didn't know what to do with both realities fully. And so I did what I thought I was supposed to do, and that was just keep speaking the Word and keep pretending like everything was okay. And I couldn't do that anymore one day because I woke up in the night and I started realizing that what the doctor had said was going to happen was happening. And everything shifted for me because in that moment when I knew that what I was believing not to happen was happening, I remember sitting up and thinking, okay, I need to just say those verses. But in that moment of fear, I couldn't remember one single verse. All the things that I had written out, that I had studied, man, they were locked in here. I could memorize and recite them. But in a life and death moment, in a moment where I needed it to be real, it hadn't taken root in here. Because there was a lot of stuff going on in here, a lot of fear, a lot of doubt, a lot of things that I didn't know how to deal with and how to connect with and bring those things before the Lord. And so in the moment when it was life and death, I sat there totally frozen. Maybe you've been there where you're like, I know I'm supposed to speak the Word, but I can't think of one thing to say. Because it was so in here, but it wasn't in here. And so I went through that night, got my paper out, just kept, repeating those verses over and over. And the next day went through what the doctors had predicted. We did experience a miscarriage, and that wasn't the only one either. And so in that moment where I'm suddenly faced with the reality that what I grew up thinking was that if I do this, then God will do this, and we'll have this result. So in my head, I didn't know it, but I had created this formula. If I know the word and I speak the word, God will fill in all the gaps and everything will work out perfect. A plus B equals C. And suddenly my formula for life was completely exploded. And it felt to me, if I was really honest, like I had handed God something that was the most important thing to me. Because in that night when I knew everything was going wrong, I just remember saying, do something, God, please do something. Just take care of this, just asking him to fix it. And it felt like I gave him the most important thing, and he was like, oops, and it just dropped and broke in a million pieces. And I didn't know what to do with that because in my head I knew I was supposed to trust him, but suddenly in my heart, I didn't experience what I thought I was supposed to. I didn't experience what he wanted me to experience, and I couldn't reconcile the why. I don't know if you're like me, but I like to know why I was that child that was constantly probably asking my parents, why? And so after that experience happened, I remember most of my time with God was spent with that question. Can you just tell me why? Just tell me why this happened, and I'll change whatever I need to change, and we'll fix it, right? And the beautiful thing about him is that he's really not interested in formulas, right? He's really not interested in just handing us a piece of information. He's interested in connecting with our hearts. But what happened for me after that situation was I felt this wall go up between us. And walking with him so long, I had never felt a wall like this before. I never felt an inability to really hear and connect with him like this before. I was still spending time with him. I was still seeking him, but I felt the wall between us. When we know that as soon as Jesus died on the cross, there was a veil, right, that separated spirit from humanity. We couldn't be in his presence, right? And the moment Jesus died, that veil just completely ripped in half. And it separated the division. It got rid of that separation so that we can be with him. But what I didn't know I was doing was essentially trying to pick pieces up of that veil and tacking it over the things that were going on in my heart. I was hiding those things. I was putting those walls up because even though, and it's kind of funny to think, like I didn't know how to be honest with him, but I read the Bible all the time. Jesus was honest. Before he went to the cross, he was really honest, right? He said, I don't want to do this. If there's any other way, please make another way, God. David was pretty honest. He sat with the Lord so many times and just said, even to the point of saying, God, I feel like you have abandoned me. God, I'm broken. God, I don't know what to do here. So in the Bible, we see examples of being honest, but I didn't know in this situation how to be honest because if I was really open with the Lord, the problem was I had felt like he let me down. I won't have you raise your hand, but I'm guessing that many of us in this room have had a moment where it feels like that. Like, God, it feels like you let me down here. Like I handed you what was the most precious thing and it shattered in a million pieces and you were supposed to be the one that could hold that thing. You were supposed to be the one that could make a certain outcome. And so through that time, he was so good to keep showing up in our times together, but I never felt like I got an answer as to why. And then finally one day it was like that wall was there and I was trying to figure out what was going on and he just kept asking, he just keeps pushing and asking questions and finally I just remember just shouting and saying like, you were supposed to be there. Like, where were you when that happened? Where were you when everything was going wrong? And it feels like you just kind of took a step back and let it fall to the ground. Like, where were you? And I was angry, and I finally told him, I feel like you let me down here. And it felt wrong to do. I don't know if you've ever been there, and it kind of feels wrong to say, God, it really feels like you let me down here. But as soon as I was open with him and said, God, I don't understand, and I don't know how to trust you now, because I knew what I was supposed to do, and I did it, and it feels like you didn't hold up your end of the formula that I've lived by, right? And so in that moment, it was so beautiful, though, because what happened, all of a sudden, the wall was down, right? That wall I had put up, he knew that I was upset at him. He knew that I didn't feel like I could trust him anymore. He knew that it had broken something in me. But he needed me to be honest enough to say it. Because as soon as I said those words, that wall was down. That wall that was keeping him out. See, the problem with the wall that we build up with him is we still have those feelings. They don't go anywhere, but he can't come in. We're not letting him come in to bring us healing. And so as soon as I said, where were you? You let me down. It was like the wall came up and he just flooded in with his peace, with his comfort. And the biggest thing that I felt in that moment really surprised me, because I thought that if he really cared, he would give me an answer. He would tell me why, and then we would fix it. But in that moment, I felt his presence so strong, and he just whispered to me, I'm grieving with you. This isn't how I wanted it to work out either. And that really surprised me about him, because I had kind of just thought, and I know that we know in our heads this isn't true, but sometimes in our hearts it feels like, well, he's God. If he wanted it to be this way, he would have intervened. He would have done something. And so in that moment, I was blown away by his comfort to sit with me and say, this hurts my heart, and I'm crying right along with you. I never experienced him to be a God who would move close that way and carry the feelings of what was happening in my life. And it showed me how connected we could be if I let that wall down and if I was honest with him. And so as soon as I let the wall down, the other thing that he asked me was, will you stop asking why? Will you give up your right to ask the question why, and your right to, what you think is your right to have an explanation? Because that was what I was constantly doing, was saying, just tell me what to do differently. Tell me if there's something that needs to be fixed. But really what I wanted to know is, why did you let this happen, right? And so one thing that he showed me, obviously there's a really easy explanation. Jesus looks at what's going on here in the earth, and there's still sin, there's still brokenness. So many things on the earth are not the way that he wants them to be yet. He looks at the earth, and his heart breaks for the things that break our heart. His heart breaks for the brokenness and the sickness and the pain that he sees. And honestly, in that situation, I felt like almost the feelings of like, how must the Father feel? He looks at this every day. Like, I have this one situation that breaks me. He's watching things that he created to be so beautiful be broken all the time. Because what happens on this earth is not yet all been restored and redeemed, right? And so there is brokenness, there is pain, there is sickness. It's easy to know the why in a general sense. But what he was asking me to do was to trust him in the things that I didn't fully understand. So I knew the why in the sense that the earth is broken, the earth is fallen, right? But what I wanted him to do was give me a quick solution. And what he asked me was, will you give up your why and learn to trust me in the things that feel like a mystery? And will you look at them differently? When Jesus was walking with his disciples, this verse is in John 9, verse 2. His disciples were kind of, I don't know who said this question. I'm guessing it was probably Peter, because he seems to be the one who would ask the why. But they were walking down the street, and it says, he noticed a man who had been blind from birth. And his disciples said, Teacher, who sinned that this man was born blind, him or his parents? And Jesus looked at them, and I can just almost feel like, he's like, yeah, they want a specific answer, and I'm not going to give them that. He didn't say, oh, his mom did this one thing when she was this age, and that's why. He didn't give a specific example. He looked at his disciples, and he said, neither one. There's not a quick explanation for the brokenness in the world. There is brokenness in the world. But instead of giving them a simple explanation, he taught them to look at brokenness differently. And he said, this man's blind, and it's a beautiful opportunity for you to watch him experience God's miracle. And I remember Jesus showing me that he actually sees, the brokenness in the world hurts his heart. Yeah, it's not what he wants it to be. And also, he looks at pain, and he looks at sickness, and he looks at brokenness as a beautiful opportunity to manifest his glory and show us how good he is. Yes, he's broken in it, and he doesn't just sit there and say, I wish everything wasn't broken. He looks at the brokenness and says, oh, let's do something about that. Let's fix that. And because I already told you that we have 3 kids, that he did something beautiful and healed and restored for us. And we were able to experience just an amazing redemption in that story as we had those 3 girls. And so he does love to look at different things we go through as an opportunity to work a miracle in our lives. But he doesn't just give us a formula or an explanation. I think sometimes we look for that quick explanation and we look for a formula. And if we're not willing to live in pockets where it is mystery, where we don't understand, it really limits our ability to be intimate with and trust him if all we're looking for is an explanation. What I wanted was an explanation, but he knew that what I needed was more connection. And so he was so good to give that. Because with the Lord, it's so easy to want A, B, and C, right? To want that formula. But what he really wants to do for us is he really wants to move us beyond formulas and show us who he is. He wants us to experience revelation about him so that we can walk in it. And so he doesn't want to limit us to having an explanation. He does show us things sometimes, and there are times even where Jesus would say, this is why this didn't work out. He does offer explanations at times, but it all comes out of that place of connection. He knows that if we aren't deeply connected with him, then all we are doing is walking out formulas. And he created us for intimacy, not for those formulas, right? And so there's a couple things that I really learned from this. The biggest thing that I learned was that he could handle my lowest moments, and he could handle the pain that I was feeling. He could handle my honesty. When I finally got honest with him and said, I feel like you let me down, he could handle that. He didn't say, okay, well, get yourself right and come back when you can stop being disrespectful, right? He didn't say, well, you're wrong, so, figure out why you're wrong and then we'll talk. He didn't say any of that. He could handle what I was feeling, how broken I felt, what I was going through, and he could sit with me in it and we could connect in that. And so part of prayer is not just talking to him, it's a deep heart connection that he wants to initiate with us if we'll open that veil or take that wall down and let him into those places. So one thing I had learned was yielding to the existence of mystery. That was the first thing that I shared a little bit about. I know that even Jesus' followers learned to yield to the fact that there is mystery. There are things we don't understand, but we can trust his goodness in it. Another thing that I learned about, and I've explained it a little bit, was really trusting him with the secrets of my heart and knowing that he could handle those things. Just like Jesus did, just like David did. We see examples all through the Bible where God can handle what's going on in our heart. And if we're faithful to take down the wall and show him what's inside, he's so faithful to come in and bring freedom and bring healing to those areas. The other thing that really, I feel like this season in my life really solidified for me was the importance if you're walking with the Lord and you're supposed to build a prayer life, you're supposed to have a secret place with him. And there are some moments where we just honestly don't feel like doing it, right? In that season where I felt let down, there were moments where it was like, I don't know what to talk to you about, God. I don't really have anything to say right now. But in those moments, there was one thing that I knew, that I didn't know how to rebuild the connection I felt like we had, but I never wanted to live without him. That was the one thing that I knew. I don't know why you let me down. I don't know why this happened. I don't know why you're not telling me why it happened, but I don't want to live without you. And so making space to connect with him, even in the tough moments. If you've had a meaningful relationship, like a family relationship, a marriage that has had its ups and downs, like I know, we've been married, it'll be 15 years next week. And there were times where it was like, I'm just going to be with you because I want to be together, even though there's tension there, even though it's hard. But this connection is important to me, and so I'm going to make time for that, even though it doesn't feel the way I want it to feel. If you've ever been there, where you'd say, it would be great if we sat down and it's all just wonderful and beautiful. And I think our relationship with the Lord kind of mimics that of a marriage, of that covenant relationship, where in the beginning it feels so wonderful and exciting, right? And then you get into it and you're like, oh, this isn't exactly what I thought it would be. And that was the moment that I hit in the story that I'm sharing. This isn't how I thought it would be. And all of a sudden, we learn to connect on a deeper level because that those moments create for us an opportunity to dig in deeper and say, okay, let's actually build some trust here. And that was what God had really invited me into, was learning how to build trust with him in a real deep way that I hadn't experienced before. And so in being faithful, Jesus said in Matthew 6:6, hey, if you're going to pray, go into a room alone and be with me and tell me things in secret that basically he was saying you wouldn't share anywhere else. He said, I want that to be a connection point where you open up your heart to me and you tell me the things that you maybe think I can't handle or you think I don't want to hear or you feel like you're not even sure if they're okay to say. Because if you'll be honest with me, then you're taking that wall down so that I can come in and speak with you. But there's something beautiful about being faithful too in those seasons where it feels like I don't really want to spend time with you because I feel like our trust or our connection has been broken. I heard someone who's just done amazing things for God, and they were talking a couple months ago, and he said, I bet you think my secret place time is just off the wall, like revelations and amazing stuff. And I'm listening to the message, and I'm like, I'm sure it is. And he said something that stuck with me, and he said, actually, most of my quiet times with God are kind of boring. They're kind of me planting seeds into knowing that a revelation will come. And so I read the word and I talk with God and I worship and I listen. And a lot of those times I don't get this life-changing revelation. He doesn't meet me and have a life-changing encounter every single day. But I'm planting seeds into those moments. And I know that if I'm faithful to meet with him, that those moments will come and they will happen. And so if you're in a season where you'd say it's hard to meet with him, it's hard to connect with him, I would really encourage you, keep pressing in, keep making that time, and get honest with him. He can handle your feelings about what's happening. He can handle your feelings about how he's handled those things. He can handle what's going on in your heart, and he wants to do that for you. He wants you to let him in so that he can bring his healing, so that he can connect with you in that